The air at Firebase Apex was the color of rust and tasted of grit. It coated the tongue, settled in the lungs, and clung to the skin like a second, unwanted layer. To Anya Petrova, it felt familiar. She stepped down from the transport truck, a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her presence barely registering against the vast, indifferent expanse of the desert training ground. The quartermaster, a man whose face was a permanent roadmap of sun-baked disapproval, glanced at her transfer papers, then at her. He saw a woman of indeterminate age, her face lean and unlined by emotion, her pale hair pulled back in a severe, functional knot. He saw the crisp, new administrative insignia on her collar. Another body from headquarters, sent to tally supplies and clutter up the command tent. He grunted, stamped the papers with a thud of finality, and pointed toward a row of prefabricated barracks. Down there, find an empty rack. He didn't offer a name or a welcome. He didn't need to. She was a temporary fixture, as transient as the dust devils that danced along the perimeter fence. Anya gave a single, short nod and walked away, her steps even and economical. She didn't look at the soldiers who loitered in the shade of the motor pool, their eyes lingering on her for a moment before dismissing her as irrelevant. She already knew what they saw. A clerk, a woman, a non-combatant. In a place built on the currency of physical prowess and tactical acumen, she was a civilian in a soldier's uniform, a ghost at the feast. Colonel Madsen held her file in his hand as if it were a dead thing. He was a man carved from the same rock as the surrounding mesas, his patience worn thin by budget cuts, failing equipment, and the relentless sun. He peered over his reading glasses, his gaze sweeping over Anya, who stood at ease before his desk. Petrova, Anya, he read aloud, his voice flat. Records analyst. You're here to assist with the pre-deployment audit. He tossed the folder onto his desk. We have a perfectly capable staff sergeant who handles our records, Petrova. I don't need another number cruncher from Central Command telling me my paperwork is out of date while my men are failing their marksmanship qualifications. His dismissal was not personal. It was institutional. He saw her as a symptom of a bureaucracy that prioritized spreadsheets over soldiers. Find a desk, stay out of the way, and try not to use up too much of our conditioned air. A younger officer, a fresh-faced lieutenant, named Nash with more swagger than sense, smirked from the corner of the tent. Don't worry, sir, Nash said, his voice loud enough for Anya to hear clearly. We'll keep the real work to the professionals. Can't have her breaking a nail on a rifle casing. Madsen didn't reprimand him. The sentiment, however crudely expressed, was one he shared. Anya's expression didn't flicker. Her eyes, a shade of gray that seemed to absorb the light, met the colonel's for a brief, unreadable moment. Yes, sir, she said. Her voice was low and steady, devoid of resentment or apology. She turned and walked out, leaving the two men to their world of masculine certainty. She did not go to the administrative tent. Instead, she walked the perimeter of the base, her gait relaxed but purposeful. She observed. She saw the way the wind kicked up sand from the west every afternoon, a predictable pattern the snipers on the long-range course seemed to be fighting rather than using. She saw the mechanics in the motor pool struggling with a persistent vapor lock issue in the light armored vehicles, a problem endemic to high-altitude desert environments. She spent an hour near the firing range, sitting on an overturned ammunition crate, ostensibly waiting for the supply clerk. She watched the soldiers cycle through. She saw their posture, their grip, their breathing, or lack thereof. Lieutenant Nash was running the line, his instructions a barrage of shouted corrections that only made his soldiers more tense. Control your breathing, Daniels. You're heaving like you just ran a marathon, he yelled, though he offered no instruction on how. Squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it, he barked without showing the slow, deliberate pressure required. Anya's gaze was analytical, her focus absolute. As she watched, she unconsciously rubbed her left wrist. For a fleeting second, the cuff of her uniform sleeve slid back, revealing the faded, intricate lines of a tattoo just above the bone. A bird of prey, its wings half furled in a dive, its eyes rendered with an impossible, piercing detail. It was an old mark from a life she was supposed to have forgotten. She saw a young private, his hands shaking, fumbling a magazine change. Nash descended upon him, his voice a whip-crack of frustration. Anya looked away, not out of disinterest, but with the quiet, weary patience of someone who knew that a broken thing could not be fixed by shouting at it. The pressure on Colonel Madsen mounted. The brigade-level qualification shoot was less than a week away, and his battalion scores were abysmal. More than 30% of his soldiers were on track to fail, a statistic that would bring the weight of command down on him like a rock slide. The failure reflected poorly on his leadership, on his unit's readiness, on everything that mattered. His daily briefings became tense, clipped affairs. Lieutenant Nash, whose platoon had the worst scores, grew defensive. "It's the rifles, sir," he insisted, holding up a maintenance report. "They're worn. The optics lose 0 if you look at them wrong." It was a poor excuse, and everyone knew it. The rifles were not ideal, but they were functional. The failure was in the fundamentals. Morale plummeted. The soldiers, sensing their own impending failure, grew sullen and fatalistic. The mood on the range was a toxic cocktail of anxiety and resentment. They weren't training, they were enduring. Madsen walked the line himself, his presence a dark cloud. He saw the flinching, the rushed shots, the held breaths that sent rounds flying wide of their targets. He saw the quiet desperation in their eyes. He was losing control, and the clock was ticking. Anya, meanwhile, completed her audit of the supply depot's records in 2 days, a task that should have taken a week. She worked with a silent, relentless efficiency that unnerved the staff sergeant who was supposed to be supervising her. When she was done, she didn't report to Madsen. She simply took a cleaning kit and a box of tools and went to the armory. The qualification range was chaos. Nash was losing his temper, his voice raw. A soldier named Casey, a kid barely out of his teens, was on the verge of tears, his shots patterning in a wide, hopeless circle around the distant target. "Just aim, damn it," Nash yelled, grabbing the rifle from the boy's hands. "It's not complicated." Anya was there, ostensibly to inventory spent brass casings. She moved through the background, unnoticed, until she stopped behind the distraught private. She didn't speak to Nash. She didn't ask for permission. She placed a hand gently on Casey's shoulder. "Breathe with me," she said, her voice a low murmur that cut through the lieutenant's shouting. She inhaled slowly, deeply, and held it. The boy, startled, instinctively mirrored her. "Now let half of it out," he did. "Hold." She stepped forward and picked up a different rifle from the rack, one that had been discarded. Her hands moved over it with an intimacy that was startling. She checked the seating of the optic, her thumb making a fractional adjustment to the stock, her fingers testing the trigger's breakpoint. It was not the movement of a clerk. It was the movement of a master craftsman. She settled into a prone position next to Casey, the rifle becoming an extension of her body. "Watch the wind," she said, her voice still quiet. "It's not your enemy. It's just a number. Learn to count it." She fired. There was no fanfare, no dramatic recoil, just a soft crack and a hiss of the bullet slicing through the air. A moment later, the sharp ping of the round, striking the dead center of the steel target, echoed back. She hadn't aimed at the center. She had aimed a foot to the left, letting the wind carry the round home. She didn't say another word. She just laid the rifle down and looked at Casey. "Your turn. Breathe." A profound silence fell over the firing line. Even Lieutenant Nash was struck dumb, his mouth slightly agape. He had seen the shot. Everyone had. It wasn't just a bullseye. It was a demonstration of a principle he had been trying and failing to articulate for weeks. He looked at Anya, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not a clerk but an enigma. The quiet woman from headquarters had just displayed a level of marksmanship that he, a commissioned infantry officer, could only dream of. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he stammered, his arrogance deflating like a punctured tire. Anya met his gaze, her gray eyes giving nothing away. "Here and there," she replied, her tone even. She turned her attention back to Private Casey, ignoring the stares of the other soldiers. The old, grizzled range safety NCO, a master sergeant who had seen everything twice, ambled over. He didn't speak to Nash. He looked at Anya, his eyes narrowed, and then his gaze fell to her left wrist, where the cuff had once again ridden up. He saw the diving raptor. A flicker of something, disbelief, then dawning recognition, crossed his face. He'd seen that tattoo once before, years ago, on a ghost who had passed through a forward operating base in a place that didn't officially exist on any map. He didn't say a word, but his posture changed. The slouch of casual authority was gone, replaced by a subtle, ramrod stillness. He knew he was in the presence of something far outside the lines of a standard personnel file. He caught Colonel Madsen's eye from across the range and gave a slow, deliberate nod. That evening, Anya was summoned back to the command tent. The atmosphere was different. Lieutenant Nash stood in the corner, his earlier smirk replaced by a look of humbled curiosity. Colonel Madsen was behind his desk, but he wasn't looking at her file. He was looking at her. Petrova, he began, his voice stripped of its earlier condescension. Master Sergeant Owens seems to think you know your way around a rifle. It was not a question. The men are failing. Nash's methods are not producing results. I'm putting you on the line tomorrow. You will not be shouting. You will not be running drills. You will assist them. Show them what you showed Private Casey. This was her second trial. No longer an accidental intervention, but a direct order. She was being formally brought into the fold, her perceived value shifting from administrative burden to tactical asset. She simply replied, "Yes, sir." The next day, she was on the range at dawn. She didn't gather the soldiers for a lecture. She walked the line, moving from one struggling shooter to the next. For one, she adjusted the length of his rifle stock by a mere half-inch, changing his entire posture. For another, she didn't touch the weapon at all, but instead had him dry fire for 10 minutes, focusing only on the slow, steady press of his trigger finger until the muscle memory was ingrained. She spoke to a young sniper not about windage, but about the mirage rising from the heated ground, teaching her how to read its subtle dance to judge an inconsistent breeze. She worked without ego, her focus entirely on the soldier in front of her. Her instructions were brief, precise, and tailored to the individual. The results were immediate and dramatic. Shot groupings tightened. The ping of steel became a regular, rhythmic beat instead of a sporadic surprise. The soldiers, who had first been skeptical, now watched her with a mixture of awe and deep respect. They followed her every quiet instruction as if it were gospel. On the final day before qualifications, as the sun beat down on the now competent shooters, Colonel Madsen received a secure satellite call in his tent. The voice on the other end was raspy, belonging to a man of immense authority, a 3-star general from Special Operations Command, a man Madsen hadn't spoken to in a decade. "Madsen," the general said, his voice crackling over the line. "I'm looking at a personnel transfer list for my own bookkeeping. It says you have an analyst Anya Petrova on your base." "Confirm." Madsen, confused, confirmed it. "Sir, yes. She's assisting with marksmanship instruction." There was a long pause on the other end. "Son," the general said, his voice dropping low, "you do not have an analyst Anya Petrova. There is no such person. What you have is the ghost of the Zarin Valley. What you have is Kestrel." Madsen felt a cold dread mix with astonishing clarity. Kestrel. The call sign was the stuff of legend, a name whispered in intelligence briefings, attached to missions that were officially denied. She was the sole survivor of a deep cover unit, designated Project Aquila, a team so elite and so secret that when it was compromised and wiped out, all records of its existence were scrubbed from every database. Her file is a fabrication, a legend to keep her safe while we figure out what to do with her, the general continued. The tattoo on her wrist, that's the unit insignia. Madsen, you have a weapon of strategic value, counting brass casings on your firing range. Whatever she is doing for you, let her do it. And when she's done, you forget you ever saw her. Is that clear?" Madsen stood frozen, the receiver pressed to his ear. He looked out the tent flap toward the range, where he could see Anya's slender form moving calmly among his men. He wasn't looking at a clerk anymore. He was looking at a living piece of classified history. He was looking at someone who had operated in a reality he could barely imagine. His skepticism wasn't just wrong. It had been profoundly, cosmically ignorant. A deep, humbling reverence settled over him. The day of the qualification arrived. A quiet confidence had replaced the former anxiety. One by one, Madsen's soldiers stepped up to the line and passed, most with scores that far exceeded the minimum standard. Private Casey shot expert. Lieutenant Nash, who had spent the last 2 days shadowing Anya, qualified with the highest score of his career. The battalion was saved. The official part of the day was over. A small crowd lingered, the air thick with unspoken admiration for the quiet woman who had turned them around. It was Nash who spoke first, his voice clear and stripped of all its former arrogance. "Ma'am," he said, the honorific now holding its true weight. "What's the base record on the advanced course?" The master sergeant grunted. 298 out of 300. Set by a Delta operator 3 years ago. Nobody's touched it since. All eyes turned to Anya. She looked at the colonel, who gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of permission. This was no longer a test. It was a coronation. She walked to the firing line and picked up the same standard issue rifle she had used before. She didn't stretch or prepare. She simply became still. The course was a complex series of targets at varying, unknown distances, appearing for only seconds at a time. It required speed, precision, and an almost supernatural ability to calculate ballistics on the fly. Anya began. Her movements were a fluid, unbroken sequence of action. Breathe, sight, squeeze, cycle. The rifle seemed to fire of its own accord, each report followed by the immediate, satisfying ring of impact. The crowd was silent, mesmerized. She wasn't just shooting. She was performing a violent, elegant art. The final target, a small steel plate at 600 meters, appeared. She fired. The ping echoed across the desert. When the final score was tallied, the master sergeant's voice was thick with disbelief. 300 out of 300. A perfect score, a new record. There was no wild cheering. The display had been too profound, too humbling. Instead, the soldiers, led by Lieutenant Nash, simply stood taller. Colonel Madsen walked over to her. He didn't offer a handshake or a congratulations. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, drew himself to his full height, and rendered a sharp, formal salute. It was the highest sign of respect one soldier could give another. Anya Petrova, the ghost known as Kestrel, met his gaze and returned it not with a salute, but with a simple, quiet nod of acknowledgement. The gesture was enough. She did not attend the small celebration the men held that night. Her work was done. The next morning, as the sun cast long shadows across the awakening base, she stood by the transport that would take her away. She carried the same single duffel bag. Her file had been closed out. Her official purpose served. Colonel Madsen was there to see her off. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the rust-colored dust swirling around their boots. "Your next assignment?" he asked, knowing he had no right to. "Another audit," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It was an answer that said everything by saying nothing. He understood. Her life was a series of covers, a permanent state of being undercover from a world that had no place for what she was. As she turned to climb into the truck, her sleeve pulled back one last time, revealing the diving raptor. The bird of prey, a symbol of a life of silent, lethal precision, seemed to catch the morning light. Madsen looked at it, then at her, and saw the truth of her existence. A quiet strength that did not need to be announced, a competence that spoke for itself in the hushed language of action. She was a record setter, a ghost, a teacher. She was Anya Petrova, and she was gone, leaving behind nothing but a perfect score on a dusty range and the enduring, transformative power of respect that had been earned in silence. The truck rumbled away, its dust trail mingling with the air until it, too, vanished into the indifferent desert.